The Galaxy had been dying for 300 years, and nobody in the galaxy cared anymore. Their homeworld was called Thesara 7, and it floated at the edge of known space where the stars grew thin and cold, orbiting a sun that was slowly dying just like them. And the Galaxy had watched their civilization crumble piece by piece while the rest of the galaxy turned away. Ambassador Kyrell stood at the great viewing window of the last standing city, her four-fingered hands pressed against the cold glass as she watched another wave of Keth landing pods burn through the atmosphere like falling stars made of fire and death. And behind her, the council chamber held only 7 members now, when there had been 90 in her youth. The Keth were monsters, pure and simple, a swarm species that consumed worlds and moved on, leaving nothing but ash and bone in their wake. And they had chosen Thesara 7 as their next feast. Elder Vaughn shuffled forward on legs that had grown weak. With age and hunger, his voice barely above a whisper when he spoke. "They will not come, Ambassador, and we both know this truth even if we refuse to speak it aloud. For we have sent 8,000 messages across 60 years, and the Galactic Concord has abandoned us completely." Kyrell did not turn from the window because she could not bear to see the despair in the eyes of her people. Those compound eyes that had once shimmered with blue light, but now faded to dull gray from malnutrition and hopelessness. The Galactic Concord was supposed to protect them, a grand alliance of 42 species that traded and cooperated and promised to defend each other against threats like the Keth. But when the swarm had first appeared in Galaxy space, the Concord had done nothing at all. They had their reasons, of course, because powerful governments always have reasons for cruelty. And the reason was simple. The Galaxy had failed to pay their tribute during the Great Famine, choosing to feed their children instead of filling Concord coffers, and for this crime they had been expelled from the Alliance and marked as unworthy of protection. "There must be someone," Kyrell whispered against the glass, her breath fogging the surface. "Somewhere in this vast and terrible galaxy, there must be someone who still believes in helping those who cannot help themselves." The communications officer was a young male named Fessick, who had been born during the siege and had never known a day of peace, and he looked up from his console with confusion spreading across his features. "Ambassador, we are receiving a transmission, but it is strange because it does not match any known Concord frequency." "What is the source?" "A small yellow star in an unremarkable corner of the galaxy, third planet from its sun, and they call themselves Earth." Kyrell turned slowly, afraid to hope, because hope had become a poison that killed more surely than Keth. "Weapons. Play the message." The voice that filled the council chamber was unlike anything they had heard before. Warm and determined, and somehow kind, even through the static of interstellar distance. "This is Captain Daniel Cole of the Earth vessel Harbinger, and we have heard your distress calls, all 8,000 of them across 60 years. And we want you to know that someone was listening, someone cared, and we are coming to help you. So please hold on, because humanity does not abandon those in need." The council chamber fell silent. Elder Vaughn made a sound that might have been a sob or a laugh, and Fessick stared at his console as if it had grown wings. And Kyrell felt something crack open in her chest that she had kept locked away for decades. "Humans," she said softly. "I have heard of them. A young species barely a century into spacefaring, considered primitive by Concord standards, and they are coming here." "Why would they come?" asked Counselor Mira, her voice trembling. "When the great powers of the galaxy will not lift a finger to save us." "I do not know," Kyrell admitted, "but I intend to find out." The transmission continued with coordinates and arrival times and promises that seemed too good to be true. And then Captain Cole spoke again. "We know you have no reason to trust us, and we know the galaxy has taught you that hope is dangerous. But we are asking you to believe in us anyway, because where we come from, leaving someone to die when you could help them is not something we can live with. And we would rather try and fail than never try at all. Kyrell ordered the message broadcast to every surviving Veloxi settlement, every bunker and shelter and hiding place where her people cowered in fear. And she told them that strangers were coming from across the stars, not to conquer or exploit, but simply to help. Some believed, and some did not, because 300 years of abandonment had taught the Veloxi that the galaxy was cold and uncaring. But even the doubters felt something stir in their hearts that they had thought long dead. 3 days later, the human fleet arrived. They came out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system, 5 ships that were small by galactic standards, and built with angles where Concord vessels had elegant curves, functional and practical, and somehow beautiful in their simplicity. The Harbinger led the formation, followed by the Steadfast and the Defiance, and a medical ship called the Clara Barton, and a vessel named Mercy that was loaded with food and supplies and everything the Veloxi needed to survive. Kyrell watched them approach on the long-range sensors, and she wept for the first time in 40 years. They actually came, she said to no one in particular. These humans who owe us nothing and gain nothing from helping us, they crossed the galaxy to stand beside strangers. Captain Cole sent another message as his fleet took up defensive positions around the Sara 7 upon the second page. Ambassador Kyrell, this is the Harbinger and ready to assist, so please tell us what you need most urgently, and we will make it happen. Kyrell wiped her eyes and straightened her shoulders, and spoke with a voice that carried the weight of her entire species. We need everything, Captain Cole. We need food and medicine and weapons and hope, but most of all, we need someone to stand with us against the darkness. Then that is what you will have, Cole replied, because humanity did not come here to watch from a safe distance. We came here to fight beside you, and to show the galaxy that no one should ever be left to die alone. The Keth were still coming, and the Concord was still watching from afar, and the situation was still desperate beyond measure. But for the first time in 300 years, the Veloxi were not alone. And sometimes that makes all the difference. Difference in the universe. Captain Daniel Cole stood on the bridge of the Harbinger and studied the tactical display with eyes that had seen too many wars and too much death, but had never grown cold to the suffering of others. He was 53 years old, with gray at his temples and a calm, steady voice that made people believe everything would be all right, even when the odds said otherwise. And right now, the odds were very much against them. "Talk to me, Amy," he said to his tactical officer, Lieutenant Amy Reyes, a sharp woman in her 30s who had served with Cole for 7 years and trusted him with her life. Keth forces are concentrated in the northern hemisphere with approximately 40,000 ground troops and 200 atmospheric fighters, and they have orbital platforms providing fire support and blocking any attempt at evacuation. What about the Veloxi? 3 major cities still holding, population centers under constant siege, civilian casualties estimated in the millions over the past decade, and they are running out of food and ammunition and time. Cole nodded slowly and turned to his executive officer, Commander Lisa Grant, who stood beside him with her arms crossed and worry written across her face. "Lisa, what do we have to work with?" 5 ships against an established invasion force, Danny, and the math does not look good. But I did not sign up for this mission expecting it to be easy. None of us did, Cole agreed, but we knew what we were getting into when we answered those distress calls, and backing out now is not an option. He opened a channel to the entire fleet, and his voice carried across the void of space to every human vessel. "All ships, this is Cole, and I want to be clear about something before we begin. We did not come here to observe, and we did not come here to make a token gesture. We came here to help these people survive. And that means we are going to fight, and some of us are going to die. But that is the price of doing what is right. He paused and looked around his bridge at the men and women who had volunteered for this mission, knowing exactly what it might cost them. Steadfast and Defiance will engage Keth orbital platforms and clear a path for evacuations. Mercy and Clara Barton will begin rescue operations and medical support on the surface. And Harbinger will provide ground support and coordination. Commander Samuel Wright's voice came back from the Steadfast, steady and unafraid. Understood, Captain. We will punch a hole through those platforms or die trying. Just punch the hole, Sam. I need you alive for the celebration afterwards. I will do my best, sir. The human fleet moved into action with a precision that would have surprised anyone who thought them primitive, because humanity had been fighting wars since before they learned to write, and they had gotten very good at it. The Steadfast and Defiance charged the orbital platforms with weapons blazing, and the Keth were caught off guard, because no sane species would attack a fortified position with such small numbers. But humans had never been particularly sane when it came to helping others. Lieutenant Reyes tracked the battle on her console and called out updates. Steadfast has destroyed 2 platforms and is taking heavy fire. Defiance is engaging the 3rd platform and reports multiple hull breaches, but still combat effective. Tell them to keep pushing, Cole ordered. Every second they buy us is another life we can save. On the surface of Thessera 7, human marines dropped from the sky in armored pods that slammed into the burning streets of Thesser Prime with enough force to crack pavement. Sergeant Kevin Torres was first out of his pod with his rifle up and his squad right behind him. 12 men and women who had trained for years to be the best at what they did. And what they did was save. Move fast and stay tight, he ordered. Civilians are priority 1, and everything else is secondary. The Keth swarmed toward them almost immediately. Nightmare creatures with armored shells and razor claws, and absolutely no mercy in their insect eyes. But Torres had fought worse things in his nightmares, and he was not impressed. "Contact front," shouted Private Danny Ortiz, opening fire with his heavy weapon. "Lots of them." "Then we'd better get to work," Torres replied, and the humans began to fight. It was brutal and bloody and exactly what they had expected, because the Keth were evolved for combat, and they did not surrender or retreat. But humans were stubborn in ways that defied logic, and they held their ground through sheer determination. Ambassador Kyrell found them 3 hours later in the ruins of the government district, a squad of strange aliens in heavy armor who fought like demons to protect people they had never met. Pulled off his helmet so she could see his face, sweaty and covered in Keth blood, but smiling despite everything. "Ambassador Kyrell, I presume," he said. "I am Sergeant Torres, and we are here to get your people to safety." Kyrell stared at him in wonder, because she had seen warriors from many species, but none who smiled in the middle of a battle, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "You came," she said. "You actually came." "Of course we came, ma'am. Now please tell me where your civilians are hiding, so we can start evacuating them." In orbit, the battle continued to rage as the Steadfast took hit after hit, but refused to fall. Her captain standing on a bridge filled with smoke and fire, and the screams of wounded crew members. "Hull integrity at 40%, reported his tactical officer. "We cannot take much more of this." "We do not need much more," Wright replied. "Just a few more minutes to clear the last platform." The Steadfast fired everything she had left into the Keth station and watched it explode in a satisfying ball of fire and debris. "Harbinger, this is Steadfast. Orbital path is clear for evacuations. You are welcome." "Good work, Sam," Cole replied. "Now get your ship out of the fire and let the Defiance cover you." "Negative, Captain. Defiance is in worse shape than we are. I am staying in the fight." Cole wanted to argue, but he knew Wright was right. And he also knew that every member of this fleet had made peace with the possibility of death before they ever left Earth. Understood, Steadfast. Give them hell. The evacuation began in earnest, with human shuttles descending through the atmosphere to pick up Veloxi refugees, while Marines held defensive perimeters against endless waves of Keth attackers. Dr. Nathan Park worked without rest in the Clara Barton's medical bay, treating injuries he had never seen before on patients whose biology he barely understood, learning as he went, and refusing to let another life slip away. Their blood is copper-based, he muttered to his nurse, Maria Santos, completely incompatible with our supplies, but I think I can synthesize something that will work if we get creative. How creative? Very creative, Maria. Bring me the emergency hull sealant and pray this works. It worked, barely, and Park saved 17 Veloxi lives that hour alone. On the ground, Torres and his squad pushed deeper into the city, gathering survivors and fighting through Keth patrols and never stopping to rest, because rest meant death for the people they were trying to save. Sergeant, called Corporal Beth Harrison, we have a problem. Keth reinforcements are moving to cut off our extraction route. Then we find another route. There is no other route, Sarge. Torres looked at his squad and then at the 200 Veloxi civilians huddled behind them, terrified, but hopeful, because humans had come to save them. Then we make one, he said. Harrison, take point and find us a way through. Everyone else form up around the civilians and prepare to move. They fought their way through 6 city blocks of Keth-occupied territory and lost 3 good soldiers doing it. But they got those civilians to the extraction point, every single one of them. Ambassador Kyrell watched the human shuttles lift off with the first wave of refugees, and she turned to Torres, with tears streaming down her face. Why, she asked, why would you die for us? Torres reloaded his weapon and checked his squad's ammunition, and answered without looking up. Because someone had to, ma'am, and we were the only ones who showed up. The evacuation was chaos and horror and hope, all mixed together in a desperate struggle against time itself. Dr. Nathan Park had not slept in 42 hours, and his hands were shaking from exhaustion, but he refused to stop, because every minute he rested was a minute someone might die, and he had not crossed the galaxy to let that happen. Another transport coming in, called Maria Santos from the doorway of the medical bay. 63 Veloxi refugees, and about half of them need immediate attention. Prep beds 7 through 20, and get me another dose of the synthesized blood substitute. We are going to need it. The Clara Barton had been designed to handle medical emergencies for a crew of 200 humans, not thousands of alien refugees with completely different biology. But Park and his team had thrown out the manual on day 1 and started improvising. A young Veloxi female was carried in on a stretcher, with burns covering most of her body. Park moved to her side immediately, scanning her injuries with equipment that had never been calibrated for her species. What happened to her? Keth incendiary weapon, said the Marine who had carried her in, a young man named Private Danny Ortiz whose armor was scorched and dented from combat. She was protecting a group of children when the blast hit. Park looked at the burns and felt his heart sink, because he had no idea how to treat injuries this severe on a species he had only learned about 3 days ago. I don't know if I can save her, he admitted quietly. Please try, Ortiz said. She saved 11 kids, Doc. She deserves a chance. Park nodded and got to work, using everything he had learned and everything he could guess and a whole lot of desperate creativity. And 4 hours later, the young Veloxi was stable and breathing and probably going to survive. You did it, Maria said with wonder in her voice. Corrected. And we are going to keep doing it until every single person on this planet who needs help gets it. In orbit, the battle had entered its 2nd day, and the human fleet was bleeding. The Steadfast had taken so much damage that she was barely holding together, her hull punctured in 17 places, and her crew working frantically to keep life support running. But Commander Samuel Wright refused to withdraw. "Captain Cole, this is Steadfast. We have lost main engines, but weapons are still operational, and I am not leaving this fight." "Sam, you need to pull back and let us cover you." "Negative, Danny. If I pull back, then the Keth will have a clear shot at the evacuation transports, and I am not going to let that happen." Cole closed his eyes for a moment, because he knew Wright was right, and he also knew what it was going to cost. "Understood, Sam. You are a good man." "Just doing what needs to be done, Captain. Same as Olive." The Keth brought in more ships than anyone had expected. A second wave that appeared at the edge of the system and began moving toward the planet with murderous intent. Lieutenant Amy Reyes counted the signatures on her tactical display, and her face went pale. "Captain, I am reading 37 additional Keth warships incoming. They will be in weapons range within 6 hours. Can we hold that long?" "I do not know, sir, but we are going to try." On the surface, Sergeant Kevin Torres and his Marines had been fighting non-stop for 48 hours, and they were running out of everything: ammunition, medical supplies, energy, hope. But they kept fighting anyway, because that was what humans did. "Sergeant," called Corporal Beth Harrison, her voice rough with exhaustion, "we have another group of civilians pinned down in the Eastern District, approximately 300 Veloxi, including children." "How many Keth between us and them?" "A lot." Torres looked at his squad, 12 soldiers reduced to 8 after 2 days of brutal combat, all of them wounded and exhausted, and still ready to fight. "Then we go through them. Harrison, take point, and everyone else follow my lead." They fought their way through 2 kilometers of Keth-occupied territory, and it cost them dearly. Private Lucy Chen was 22 years old, and had joined the service because she wanted to help people, and she died holding a defensive position so that 300 Veloxi civilians could reach the evacuation shuttles. Torres held her hand as she passed, and promised her that her sacrifice meant something, that the people she saved would remember her name, and then he picked up his rifle and kept fighting, because stopping was not an option. "Sergeant," Harrison said quietly, "we have lost Chen." "I know. But we saved 300 people, Beth, and that is what matters." "Does it ever get easier?" "Sarge, no, it does not, and I hope it never does, because the day it gets easy is the day we stop being human." In the Steadfast, Commander Wright watched the Keth fleet approaching and made a decision that he had known was coming since the moment he volunteered for this mission. "All hands, this is the captain. I am ordering everyone to abandon ship immediately. Take the escape pods and get to the Harbinger." "Sir," protested his first officer, "we cannot leave you here alone." "I am not asking, Lieutenant. I am giving you a direct order. Now go." The crew evacuated reluctantly, looking back at their captain as they climbed into escape pods, and Wright sat alone on his dying bridge and plotted a final course. "Harbinger, this is Steadfast. I am setting collision course for the Keth command ship. My last torpedoes are armed and ready." "Sam," Cole's voice came back, thick with emotion, "you do not have to do this." "Yes, I do, Danny, because if I take out their command ship, it will buy you hours to complete the evacuation, and that is a trade I am willing to make, Sam. Tell my daughter I kept my promise, Cole. Tell her that her father helped someone who needed it." The Steadfast accelerated toward the Keth fleet, a broken ship piloted by a brave man who had decided that some things were worth dying for. Wright watched the Keth command ship grow larger on his view screen, and he thought about his daughter back on Earth, and he smiled, because he knew she would understand. "For humanity," he whispered, "and for everyone who ever needed someone to stand beside them." The Steadfast struck the Keth command ship at full speed, and the explosion lit up the void of space, like a new star being born. Captain Cole watched from the Harbinger and felt tears running down his face. But he did not have time to grieve, because there were still people to save. "All ships, this is Cole, Commander. Wright has bought us time with his sacrifice, and we are not going to waste it. Continue evacuation operations, and let us make his death mean something." The evacuation continued through the night and into the next day. human shuttles flying endless missions between the surface and the fleet, carrying Veloxi refugees to safety while Marines fought and died to protect them. By the end of the third day, over 200,000 Veloxi had been rescued from the planet, and the galaxy was watching. The Galactic Concord had sent 30 observation ships to monitor the situation, powerful vessels from 12 different species that had the weapons and technology to end the Keth invasion in hours. But they did nothing except watch. They watched humans die for strangers. They watched a species they considered primitive sacrifice everything to save people they had never met. And some of them began to wonder if maybe the humans understood something that the others did not. Rest of the galaxy had forgotten. Ambassador Kyrell stood on the bridge of the Harbinger beside Captain Cole and watched the Concord fleet sitting motionless at the edge of the system. "They will not help," she said quietly. "They never help." "Maybe not," Cole replied, "but we will keep helping anyway, because that is who we are." "Why, Captain? Why do humans care so much about strangers?" Cole thought about the question for a long moment before answering. "Because we remember what it was like to be alone and afraid, Ambassador. We remember wars and plagues and disasters where no one came to help, and we decided that we would never let anyone else feel that way if we could do something about it." Kyrell looked at this strange alien who had crossed the galaxy to save her people, and she felt something she had not felt in centuries. High Admiral Zareth of the Galactic Concord stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Judgment, and watched the humans die on his tactical display with cold indifference. He was Kelleron, a species known for their logical minds and their complete lack of what other races called compassion. And he had risen to command the Concord observation fleet precisely because he could be trusted to follow orders without letting emotions interfere. His orders were simple: observe and report, but do not intervene. The Veloxi had been expelled from the Concord 60 years ago for failing to pay their tribute during the Great Famine, and Concord law was clear that expelled species received no protection, no assistance, no mercy. "High Admiral," said his aide, a reptilian Sarathi named Kessex who had served Zareth for 15 years, "the human vessel Steadfast has been destroyed." "I observed," Zareth replied without emotion. "Foolish creatures throwing away their lives for a species they have never met. They have saved over 200,000 Veloxi civilians so far, and lost significant portions of their fleet doing so, which only proves my point about their lack of rational thinking." Kessex watched the tactical display in silence for a long moment, tracking the movement of human shuttles as they descended to the planet's surface again and again, never stopping, never resting, never giving up. "High Admiral, may I speak freely?" "You may. I have served the Concord for 30 years, and I have always believed that our policies were correct, that maintaining order and stability required difficult choices. But watching these humans sacrifice themselves for strangers has made me question everything I thought I knew." Zareth turned to look at his aide, with something approaching curiosity. "Explain your reasoning." "The Concord was founded on the principle of mutual benefit, the idea that species would cooperate because it served their interests. But the humans are not acting in their own interest at all. They are simply helping because they believe it is the right thing to do. Which is why they are primitive and we are advanced." "Is it, High Admiral? Because from where I am standing, they look like the most civilized species in the galaxy." Zareth did not respond to that, because he had no response that would satisfy either of them. On the tactical display, a human frigate named the Mercy positioned itself between a Keth destroyer and a transport ship full of Veloxi refugees, using its own hull as a shield to protect the evacuation. The Mercy was destroyed in seconds, torn apart by Keth weapons fire, but the transport escaped with 4,000 civilians aboard. Kessex made a sound that might have been grief or might have been admiration. "They just sacrificed their ship to save strangers. Irrational behavior." Find myself wishing that I possessed such a rationality. Across the Concorde observation fleet, similar conversations were happening on dozens of ships, as crew members watched the humans fight and die for people they had no obligation to help. Commander Vela of the science vessel Questor was a Mirren, a species of empaths who could feel the emotions of others across vast distances, and she was weeping uncontrollably on her bridge. "Captain," asked her first officer with concern, "what is wrong?" "I can feel them," she whispered. "The humans. I can feel what they are feeling, and it is the most beautiful thing I have ever experienced." "What are they feeling?" "Love, Lieutenant. They are feeling love for complete strangers, and they are willing to die for it." On the patrol craft Wanderer, a young Sarathi officer named Kesix the Younger, no relation to Admiral Zareth's aide, watched the battle with growing anger. "This is wrong," he said to his crew. "We have the power to help these people, and we are doing nothing." "We have our orders," replied his navigation officer. "Our orders are immoral." "That may be true, but disobeying them would end our careers." "Then let our careers end, because I would rather be a disgraced officer with a clear conscience than a successful one who stood by while innocent people died." The navigation officer looked at the tactical display, at the human ships fighting desperately against overwhelming odds, at the Veloxy transports fleeing towards safety, at the Concorde fleet doing absolutely nothing. "You are right," she said, finally. "Give the order, and I will follow." Across the observation fleet, 17 officers and crew members from various species requested permission to join the Human Defense Force, citing moral objections to Concorde policy. High Admiral Zareth denied every request without hesitation. But he could not deny the growing unrest among his own people, the whispered conversations, and the pointed looks, and the subtle signs of a fleet that was beginning to question its purpose. "High Admiral," reported his communications officer, "we are receiving transmissions from Concorde homeworlds. Citizens on multiple planets are demanding that we intervene to help the Veloxy." "The citizens do not make policy." "No, sir. But they are protesting in significant numbers. The Miran homeworld has reported crowds of over 1 million demanding action, and similar protests are forming on 7 other planets." Zareth felt something unfamiliar stirring in his chest, something that might have been doubt if he had been capable of such an emotion. "The humans have been broadcasting their rescue operations across all frequencies," his communications officer continued. "The entire galaxy is watching them sacrifice themselves for strangers." "Why would they broadcast such a thing?" "I do not know, sir. Perhaps they want the galaxy to see what compassion looks like." Kesix stepped forward with a datapad in his hand. "High Admiral, I have prepared a tactical analysis that suggests Concorde intervention would end the Keth threat within hours, and save both the remaining Veloxy and the surviving human forces." "I did not request such an analysis." "No, sir, but I prepared it anyway, because I believe you should see it." Zareth took the datapad and reviewed the data, which confirmed what everyone already knew. The Concorde fleet could end this battle whenever it chose to. "Your analysis is accurate," he admitted, "but irrelevant because we have our orders." "Orders can be changed, High Admiral, not by us." Kesix straightened his uniform and removed the rank insignia from his collar, placing it carefully on the console in front of Zareth. "Then I hereby resign my commission in the Galactic Concorde." "You cannot be serious." "Serious about anything in my life, High Admiral. I am going to take a shuttle to the human fleet and offer my services." "They will not trust you." "Perhaps not, but I would rather die trying to help them than live having watched from the sidelines." Kesix walked off the bridge without looking back, and Zareth watched him go with something that felt almost like respect. The resignation spread like wildfire through the observation fleet. Within 6 hours, 43 officers and crew members had followed Kesix's example. Abandoning their posts and making their way to the human fleet in shuttles and escape pods, and anything that could fly. They came from 12 different species, brought together by something that transcended politics and policy and rational self-interest. They came because the humans had shown them what it meant to be truly civilized. Captain Cole watched the small flotilla of Concord defectors approaching his fleet, and he felt tears forming in his eyes again. Harbinger, this is former Commander Kessex of the Concord vessel Eternal Judgment. I have resigned by commission, and I am requesting permission to join your defense force. Kessex, this is Cole. What made you change your mind? You did, Captain. You and your people showed me that the galaxy can be better than it is, and I want to be part of making that happen. Welcome aboard, Kessex. We could use all the help we can get. The defectors were not warriors, and their ships were not warships, but they positioned themselves alongside the human fleet and prepared to fight. Because some things were worth more than careers and comfort and survival. Some things were worth dying for. On the 5th day, the Keth reinforcements arrived, and hope seemed to die. 50 warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system, more than enough firepower to destroy what remained of the human fleet 10 times over. And Captain Daniel Cole stood on the bridge of the Harbinger, knowing that this was probably the end. He had lost the Steadfast and the Mercy, and half his crew members, and the ships that remained were battered and broken and running on fumes and determination. But they were still here. All ships, this is Cole, he broadcast to his fleet, to the Concord defectors who had joined them, to anyone who was listening. It has been an honor serving with every single one of you, and I want you to know that what we have done here matters. We have shown the galaxy that compassion is not weakness, that sacrifice is not foolishness, and no matter what happens next, they will never forget us. Ambassador Kyrell stood beside him on the bridge, having refused evacuation, despite Cole's repeated requests. You should go, Ambassador. There is still time to reach the refugee ships. No, Captain. My place is here beside the people who saved my species. I will not abandon you now. Cole smiled tiredly and nodded, because he understood. Then let us make our last stand together. The Keth fleet advanced in a wave of death and destruction, and the human ships prepared to sell their lives as dearly as possible. And then, something extraordinary happened. A single Concord vessel broke formation from the observation fleet, a small patrol craft that accelerated toward the human line with its weapons powered up. This is Commander Kessex of the former Concord scout ship, Wanderer. A voice crackled over the communications channel. I stand with humanity. I stand with those who do what is right, and I will die beside them if that is what fate demands. Cole felt his heart swell with something that might have been pride or might have been hope. Welcome to the fight, Kessex. But Kessex was not alone. Another Concord vessel broke formation, and then another, and then 5 more. Science ships and patrol craft and merchant vessels, crewed by beings who had watched the humans sacrifice everything and decided that they wanted to be part of something greater than themselves. P. This is Captain Vela of the Questor. I stand with humanity. P. This is Commander Thresh of the cargo hauler Persistence. I stand with humanity. P. This is Lieutenant Yora of the shuttle Bright Dawn. I stand with humanity. P. The calls kept coming, one after another, as ships from the observation fleet abandoned their posts and joined the human line. P. But it was not just the Concord ships. From across the sector, from systems that had been monitoring the broadcasts, other vessels began to arrive. P. Merchants and privateers and independent traders, from dozens of species who had seen what the humans were doing and felt something stir in their hearts that they had thought long dead. This is the free trader Star Wanderer. I am not a warship, but I can ram something if it helps. This is the mining vessel Rock Crusher. We have industrial lasers that can cut through Keth armor. This is the passenger liner Morning Light. We have no weapons, but we can evacuate refugees. Within an hour, 63 ships had joined the human formation, a ragged fleet of misfits and idealists and ordinary people who had decided that some things were worth fighting for. It was not enough to win, not against 50 Keth warships, but it was enough to make the enemy pause. And in that pause, something even more extraordinary happened. High Admiral Zareth stood on the bridge of the Eternal Judgment and watched his observation fleet dissolve as ship after ship broke formation to join the humans, reported his communications officer with barely concealed excitement. We are receiving transmissions from Concord homeworlds. The protests have grown to unprecedented levels. Governments are demanding immediate intervention. The governments do not have that authority. Sir, the Myron delegation has threatened to withdraw from the Concord entirely if we do not act, and 4 other species have indicated they will follow. Zareth stared at the tactical display, at the human ships surrounded by a growing fleet of volunteers, at the Keth armada that seemed suddenly uncertain. And he thought about Kessex, who had given up everything to stand beside strangers. He thought about the humans, who had crossed the galaxy to help people they had never met. He thought about what it meant to be civilized, truly civilized, not just powerful and orderly and efficient, but actually good. Order the fleet to engage the Keth, he said quietly. Sir? Heard me, Lieutenant? Order all Concord vessels to engage the Keth fleet immediately. We are ending this. 100 Concord warships, the most advanced vessels in the galaxy, turned their weapons on the Keth invaders. The battle was over in 3 hours. The Keth, facing unexpected resistance from the very powers they had assumed would never intervene, retreated in disarray. Their invasion force shattered, their command structure destroyed. And when the shooting stopped, Captain Cole stood on the bridge of his battered ship and wept with joy and exhaustion and relief. 6 months later, Ambassador Kyrell addressed the newly formed Galactic Coalition, a body that had risen from the ashes of the Concord to build something better. The assembly hall was filled with representatives from 60 species, beings who had come together because a handful of humans had shown them what courage and compassion could accomplish. We were forgotten, Kyrell said, her voice echoing across the chamber. But we will never forget what it means to stand together. Voice carrying across the vast chamber. We were left to die by the galaxy we thought was our family, and for 60 years we believed that the universe was cold and uncaring. She paused and looked at Captain Cole, who sat in the human delegation with the survivors of his fleet, wearing the medals that a grateful galaxy had bestowed upon them. And then strangers came from across the stars, not because we could offer them wealth or power or advantage, but simply because we needed help, and they taught us something that we had forgotten. Kyrell stepped away from the podium and gestured for Cole to join her. The human captain rose slowly, his body still bearing the scars of the battle, and walked to stand beside the ambassador. Humanity taught the galaxy that compassion is not weakness, Kyrell continued, that sacrifice is not foolishness, that standing beside those who suffer, even when it costs everything, is what makes civilization worth having. Looked out at the assembled representatives and spoke in a voice that was rough with emotion. We are not heroes. We are just people who could not look away when someone needed help, and we hope that none of you will ever look away again. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small medal, the rank insignia that Kessex had left on the console when he resigned from the Concord. This belongs to a man who gave up everything to do what was right, and there are thousands more like him across this galaxy. Ordinary people who chose compassion over comfort, who chose courage over safety, who chose to stand beside strangers instead of watching them die. Cole placed the insignia on the podium. That is the galaxy I want to live in, and I believe it is the galaxy that all of you want to live in too. The chamber erupted in applause that lasted for 20 minutes. Outside the assembly hall windows, ships from 100 worlds orbited together in peace. Fleet that had been enemies and strangers and now was something like family. The galaxy had changed forever. And it had all started with 5 human ships and a simple message broadcast across the stars. We heard your distress calls. We are coming to help you. Please hold on. Because humanity does not abandon those in need. Not ever. And now, neither would the rest of the galaxy.